All right, welcome everybody. My name is David. I'm a ranger at Katmai National Park. I'm joined today by Leon, another ranger here at Katmai.
Hello, everybody.
So today we're going to be talking about kind of the greater ecosystem of Katmai. We're doing a weekly Ask a Ranger chat. It's just going to be a short little chat, about 15 to 30 minutes. We're going to talk about some of the things other than bears that kind of surround the bears' lives. So like I said, we'll be on for about 15 or 30 minutes. You can submit your questions for these chats on explore.org in the comments section. And we're going to get started here. So the first question that we have today is, how has the spruce bark beetle affected the forest around Brooks Camp?
Yeah, when visitors first come to Katmai, one of the main questions we get is, what about all of these dead trees, right? You come to Brooks Camp, if you look out on Dumpling, you might see a lot of dead trees. Perhaps you're going out on that Falls Trail, or you're heading out into the valley on our road. And a lot of these trees, it's because of the spruce bark beetle kill. So these beetles, they will come in, and sometimes when conditions are favorable, they will have an outbreak, kind of. Their population will explode, and it's going to kill these trees. The trees that are the most affected are going to be the ones that are drought stressed.
Okay. And so drought stressed, what does that mean exactly here? We get a lot of rain in the summertime, we get some snow in the wintertime. What makes a tree drought stressed? How does that defined?
Yeah, well, because when you think about Alaska, you definitely don't think about any kind of lack of moisture, right?
That's right.
Even in our park film, it's described as notoriously miserable, and part of that is because of the amount of rain we get. But when we talk about drought stress, this is something that's been ongoing. It doesn't happen in just a year. And so when you think about that term, it's not necessarily the amount of precipitation that these trees are receiving, it's more so the type and also the timing. So you did mention like snow and rain, right? The drought-stressed trees are going to be the trees that get the most of their moisture from rain versus snow melt. And of course, in a warming climate, when you think about it, Alaska is projected to get more of its precipitation from rain rather than snow.
So we've got the white spruce here, and it likes the snow a lot more than the rain.
Yes. And
the spruce bark beetle, they're really enjoying the warmer climates because they're being able to increase their population. They're very successful right now. And so that's not looking so good for the spruce tree. How is that going to continue? What's going to happen next? Can we predict that?
It's hard to say. I mean, I did also talk, one more thing I did want to go back to was it's the type of precipitation and timing, too.
Right, okay, timing.
Because when you think about snow, right, it is a great insulator. Bears use it, for their dens.
That's right.
It covers them, their dens, and it keeps them warm. Same for a lot of other creatures that might roost in the snow, ptarmigan, whatnot. Those guys, ptarmigan, for instance, are going to be a foot below the snow level, roosting burrows in there. And the surface temperature, the difference between the air temperature there, and roosting is going to be maybe 40 degrees. So, snow is a really good insulator. And so with this snow, it's also insulating the ground. So if you don't have that snowpack, you might have a real drop in temperature, and the soil might freeze, making again harder for those trees to absorb that moisture. But going back to your question about what can we predict in the future? Sometimes conditions are so favorable, their population explodes again, but they eat themselves out of house and home.
Okay.
That's essentially what they do. If they think about eating all of your food at once, you're not going to be able to support that population. So it's going to crash again. And who knows, when conditions are favorable, you're going to have another outbreak. So it's really hard to predict that future.
So it's kind of cyclical is what you're saying
Yes.
here. And so they don't feed on the dead trees. So lots of healthy trees, their population goes up. They kill a bunch of trees, their population goes back down. Does that have an effect on other animals in the forest?
It does. I'm sure it does. Different things, rely on the spruce trees. Also, again, when those spruce trees don't have their needles or anything, more sunlight's going to reach the ground,
right.
Higher grasses, that type of thing is going to happen.
So kind of changing the flora of the entire forest just from this tree being dead now.
Yes.
Cool.
Exactly.
And you brought along a little example of something else that can come along with the beetles, right? Can we show?
Of course. So here I have some downed wood that you can kind of see, and maybe if you guys can see that there, it's got a discoloration, right? This happens from what we call blue stain fungus.
Blue stain fungus, okay.
So it's really easy, you know, to be like, oh, look at all those dead trees caused by spruce bark beetle, but they also have some kind of symbiotic relationship with this blue stain fungus that, again, leaves this discoloration here. How they're related is not quite fully understood, but we do know that they are associated, especially here in Alaska. So when you see this, something to look for, you know, if you're going around Brooks Camp, you'll also know that this was killed by spruce bark beetles.
So spruce bark beetle, bad for the spruce tree, maybe good for fungus, maybe good for plants like grasses and low growing bushes, stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, spruce bark beetles, when you think of them, you know, you might see all these dead trees and be like, oh, these are really horrible guys, right? But really, they are just using that condition to their advantage.
Right.
Spruce bark beetles, they aren't invasive. They are native here in Alaska. They're common. But yeah, especially with the increasing warmer temperatures we are seeing, for instance, this latest outbreak did affect a much larger percentage of trees than previous outbreaks have.
Okay, so this is a bigger outbreak than normal.
Yes, I think the number is something like 40% more were affected by this outbreak than
Interesting. So, you know, they're not an invasive species, but if they're really affecting the trees here, why don't we just try to get rid of the spruce bark beetle? Can we spray something? Is there a way to do that? Would we want to do that?
Well, when you think about what the Park Service does, is we're trying to protect these lands, right?
That's
the
right.
way that they're intended to be. So this is a natural phenomenon that is occurring. And so here in the park system, our way is to let things happen naturally. Just like when we don't interfere with the bears, you know, if we see hurt bears and different things like that.
That's right. So we want to protect those natural processes, let nature take its course, and we'll allow the spruce bark beetle to take over the trees, but also maybe help out some other flora and fauna along the way.
Yes, yeah.
All right. So next question we have here, another one about bugs and insects. The question was, do we have ticks in Alaska? Do we have a tick problem? Do we have a Lyme disease problem because of ticks?
Yeah, well, when you think about Alaska, you know, we don't think about snakes, and we typically don't think about ticks either. We do have some native types of ticks that are common.
Okay.
Ones that infest perhaps squirrels, snowshoe hare, birds, and other animals. But these guys aren't really the problem when we think about diseases, right? Especially in the lower 48. East Coast, you know, a lot of national parks are talking about Lyme disease, different places. The CDC has actually been tracking like Lyme disease from 2005 to 2015. You can go on and check out each state. They have how many confirmed cases, and in 2015, Alaska only had 1 confirmed case. So it's not, Lyme disease isn't something we typically worry about here. You know, it is possible that, of course, non-native species might make their way here, and those are the ones that we really want to watch for.
All right. So we're going to be kind of on the lookout, make sure we don't have invasive species here. But as far as insects in Katmai, what are some of the insects that we already have here?
Yeah.
Not necessarily invasive species, but, you know, after living here for a couple years, when I think of Alaska, one of the things I think of is insects.
Yes.
What do we got here?
We've got mosquitoes, we've got no-see-ums, white socks, horse times. I
That's
know
right.
for me it is. Right now we've got a lot of white socks kind of swarming around us and no-see-ums. But they are part of the ecosystem here. You know, different ways. For instance, the insect larvae are great food for salmon fry, you know, so think about how important salmon are to us.
And that, you know, that kind of leads us into our next question. But the biting insects, kind of a pain for us, but maybe a real valuable part of the ecosystem for other animals.
Yes, and of course they're pollinators as well.
So which are pollinators?
I believe, is going to be the male mosquitoes.
Yeah, that's right. So as much as we hate mosquitoes sometimes, it's actually only the females that bite, right?
Yes.
So a valuable part of the ecosystem, particularly you said for salmon, right?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of a food source, salmon fry.
And so the next question we have here is about keystone species. And someone wanted to know, are bears a keystone species? They're kind of they're in the spotlight a lot here in Katmai, of course. They're so fun to watch. But are they a keystone species?
The short answer is no. I mean, you talk about how how important they are here in Katmai, and it's true. It is part of what we protect now. This habitat you can even see right behind us, and it's also what draws a lot of visitors. But no, they are not a keystone species.
And so how would you define a keystone species? What makes them not a keystone species? What would make another animal a keystone species?
All right, so a keystone species, not all species are created equal.
Okay.
Some have a greater impact on the ecosystem around them, and those are going to be the keystone species. So they have a disproportionately large impact on the ecosystem around them, so that even without these species, perhaps the entire ecosystem might collapse, not exist, or might allow for invasives to come up into this area.
Okay. So if you were to take out one species from Katmai, and which species would have the biggest effect on everything else in the ecosystem?
Salmon. These guys, salmon, are the lifeblood of Katmai right here in this park. When you think about, even for people, this place has been long inhabited, over 4,000 years in the Brooks Camp area alone, and that's a lot because of the food source. When you think about also why there's such a presence in Brooks Camp, the lodge in the 50s, because anglers coming in for this salmon, and then again, visitors now still angling, coming in. But of course, animals as well. Like, how much of salmon is a seasonal feast for these creatures, right? And I know in the last Ask a Ranger, Becca mentioned about all the different animals that also feast on salmon aside from the bears.
That's right.
We've got wolves, you've got all sorts of different birds, and it's not just the animals too. She mentioned, I believe it was like the different carcasses, the nutrients that it provides for the plant life around here, whether it is from the carcasses floating back down or just being spread by the scat of other animals. So they are very important to our ecosystem.
So we've got the salmon, super important. If we took out the salmon, we'd have big problems for all the other animals.
Yes.
Is there any other animal like that in Katmai or in Alaska that is a real keystone species?
Yes, there is another keystone species that calls Katmai home, and that would be the sea otter.
Sea otter. How is the sea otter a keystone species?
Well, when you think about, actually, people might not even see sea otters on their trip here, right? They come to Brooks Camp, because Brooks Camp has a lot going on. It's where most people come. It's what we're most known for.
Right.
But the park itself is over 4 million acres. And a lot of that actually includes coastline, 497 miles of coastline. Rugged, beautiful. It supports this rich marine life. And so we have sea otters there, important part of our park as well. And our population is pretty healthy, pretty stable density, at least in recent years. And sea otters are really important as keystone species because their main food source are sea urchins.
Okay.
And by keeping the sea urchin population in check, it allows for kelp forests to grow, and those kelp forests provide an incredible habitat for a wide variety of sea life. So they support the biodiversity of the marine ecosystem.
Interesting. So maybe something that we don't see too often, kind of an inconspicuous keystone species, but nonetheless an important one.
Yes, for sure. And thinking about all of this, one of my favorite quotes is from John Muir, and it's about how when you try to pick out anything by itself,
So as we're learning, everything's kind of connected. We have to protect every little part for the whole thing to work out.
Yes.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, everybody, for joining us. We'll catch you again next time. Every week on Friday, 4 o'clock, we'll be here answering your questions. Again, you can submit those in the comment section on explore.org. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.